Hello and welcome to the Employment Hour. I'm your host, Paul KUTYLO. Our aim is to inform, motivate, and educate all of you viewers on all manners of things important to employers and employees about employment issues. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mr. Jeff Williams. Jeff, good evening.
Hi, Paul.
Good to be with you again,
Good to
sir.
be with you, too.
Very good. How are you feeling today?
Oh, wonderful.
Very good, very good. We have said many times that this is important for employees as well as employers. And today we're going to focus more on the employer, with our guest, Mr. Charles KRUGEL. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here, and thank you guys for having me.
Very good. We're glad to have you. You have a bachelor's degree from Bradley University. He also has a master's degree from in industrial organizational psychology from University of Northern Carolina, and also a law degree from Ohio Northern University. Am I correct?
That's right.
Very good. Okay. Let me read from your card here. You say that you're a human resources attorney and consultant in labor and employment law on behalf of management.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I represent management in labor and employment law related matters, and also do consulting on the HR end, which is basically proactive or preventive human resources. The basic concept being to prevent problems before they arise or before they get out of hand in the workplace.
This is so important to the employer.
It always saves more money on the front end to resolve these issues as opposed to the back end when they hit the courts or the regulatory agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the National Labor Relations Board. So it's sort of like the pay me now or pay me later proposition.
Mm-hmm. How do employers get in touch with somebody like yourself to hire somebody like you? Maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but how does that happen?
It's usually by referral. Generally, it's by referral. They know people who know me. They've heard about me, or they attend a seminar I do, or something like this. They see me on TV or on the radio, or saw me in the newspaper. Occasionally, it's by the website. I have a website too. So,
Why is business law so important to employers?
Well, it regulates. They're talking about regulating the workplace. So it's the employer, a person who runs their own business. They want to run their own business. They don't want the government or other people, a third party, telling them how to run it. And when you understand labor and employment law, you have a better chance of being able to run it your way as opposed to a third party coming in telling you how to do it. You want the government really telling you how to run your business and how to manage your employees.
Okay, but then there are rules, legal rules, that are behind all these things about business and running your own business that they must be aware of.
Yeah, we were talking about basically creating a level playing field in the workplace. So you're eliminating any discrimination, harassment, any sort of bias on the basis of race, sex, national origin, age, disability, military status, all the various types of protected classes. So basically you're looking at employees, you're hiring and treating employees on the basis of merit, their qualifications, skills, abilities, knowledge, and their ability to perform the job as opposed to who they are, as opposed to race or gender, any other protected classes.
Very good, very good. And I know we wanted to focus a little bit today on the hiring. And what kind of rules are there for employers in terms of the hiring process? What should they be aware of?
Well, obviously you can't get into issues that relate to any of the protected classes. So if you have a job application or you're doing job interviews or you post a want ad, you can't focus on anything that would call attention or tend to impact against a person's race, their age, or 40 and older, which is what the Age Discrimination Employment Act prohibits discrimination against. Any sort of disability, anything that prevents them from, disability preventing them from doing the job, or that would not otherwise prevent them from doing a job. Military status, even to an extent, arrest records, things like that. You can prohibit based on conviction for certain crimes. But basically, you're talking about limiting your employee selection criteria to anything that tends to impact against the protected classes.
Do those barriers still, do people still encounter those, even though they're not supposed to be against people that are of a certain race or a certain age or whatever? Does that still kind of come into play, though, or do you think that that's been handled?
Unfortunately, and he's kind of sigh about this, but yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens. You see it happening. It's a shame. but it does happen.
But the laws are firmly in place on that.
The laws are firmly in place. It says so in black and white. The issue becomes with enforcement. I mean, who's doing the enforcement? It always comes down to people. So again, in the workplace, you're dealing with conflict, workplace conflict, and it's not just a matter of applying the law. It's how you apply it, who's doing the application of it, how it's being handled. There's a lot of, at the grassroots level, there's a lot of diplomacy and a lot of judgment, exercising good judgment and common sense involved. So it's not just, looking at what's in black and white, but trying to make sure that these issues are resolved, trying to create a win-win situation, at least at the grassroots level.
Well, let me ask you, Chuck. We talk particularly to small employers who don't have usually anybody on staff that has anywhere near the professional qualifications to advise them on this type of employment law. If you were a small employer and you were preparing to hire for a position, what would you say are the two or three really critical things that they should observe? For example, should they have a written job description before they post for the opening? What would you say are the 2 or 3 things they need to do here to be on the safe side of the law?
Well, if it's a really small business, I mean, a written job description is always a good thing to have, but you want to make sure it's valid. So, I mean, you don't want to just write down what you think the most basic or essential functions of the job are. You need to make sure that that's real, that it's valid. It's a valid job description. You've at least pared it down to a few basic needs or essential functions, and then base the qualifications or what you're recruiting on or hiring on based on that job description. So it's a good idea to at least think analytically to some extent about it. So you're not just hiring, you're not just doing it ad hoc. So there is a little bit of analysis that needs to go into it. But you need to, figure out the logistics of the workplace itself, how that fits in case people with any sort of physical or mental disability apply, and they're able to basically do the essential functions of the job with or without an accommodation, which is what the law says. So, I mean, yeah, that is going to help, but you also want to look at, I think what comes into play a lot too is personality in the workplace. From my experience, that always seems to play into it. You want somebody that's going to fit in. And I was recently reading some studies by, it's called the Gevity Institute and Cornell University. They did some joint studies which basically indicate that personality is a key predictor of success in the workplace, how they fit in, to what's called organizational workplace culture.
Well, does that mean then that you can be excluded from employment solely on the outcome of a personality or a psychological test?
Well, let's bifurcate that. I would look at personality, yeah, you can, but a psychological test, I mean, is the test itself valid, and is it actually needed for the job? I mean, some tests tend to impact against certain races or classes of people, genders, whatever, so you want to make sure if you're going to use a test that's valid. If you're a small business anyway, using a test may not be the most cost-effective means of hiring people anyway. But yeah, just excluding them on base of personality.
I mean, are you seeing more employers requiring psychological testing to be even considered for a position? Is it more or less than maybe 10 years ago?
I'd say more than, I've seen it more than what I've seen 10 years ago, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it's significantly more or not, but I do see it more.
Now, the person on the other side of the desk, the hiring desk, what should they be concerned about, or should they be aware of these laws that impact hiring?
You mean the prospective employee?
Yes, prospective employee.
Yeah, I think, and to be honest with you, I think most of them are. I think I think employers and employees are more sophisticated nowadays because of the internet and all the cable TV. Everybody was watching OJ, and people have a better sense of what's going on in the legal system. I think people are more sophisticated. Now, it doesn't mean that just because they know the law, it doesn't mean that they know how to apply it. So I still encounter a lot of situations where people misquote, misstate, misapply the law. So they say, well, you can't do this to me, and the fact of the matter is, yeah, I mean, it comes up all the time in personality.
What would you say is the most common misconception that potential employees have when they're going into job interviews?
Yeah, we're going to a break here, so if we could keep this to a shorter answer, if we could.
I think in terms of the job interview itself,
the employee, as far as how the employment law applies in, what would you say is the greatest misconception people have?
Well, I think in the workplace itself is employment at will, which is the law of Illinois, and that's a doctrine based on a doctrine which says that you could fire based on for really any reason, any time without
We're
notice.
going to come back to that in our second segment. There's a lot to a lot of information to be had on that. You can learn more about all this on our website, www.employmenthour.com. We have a lot of really good questions there, and also a list of questions that your employer, your future employer, cannot ask you that are actually illegal to ask. Check us out on www.employmenthour.com. We'll be back in a moment. Hello, welcome back to the Employment Hour. I'm your host, Paul KUTYLO, along with Jeff Williams. We're interviewing Mr. Charles KRUGEL, Human Resources Attorney and Consultant. Charles, welcome back.
Thanks.
And at the end of the last segment, we were talking about employment at will.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah, the doctrine, and this applies in Illinois and a lot of states across the country, is that you can basically fire somebody. An employer can fire an employee for any reason, any time, with or without cause or notice. Vice versa, an employee can quit the employer any time, any reason, with or without notice. So
that sounds very more of advantage to the employer than it is the employee.
To an extent, I don't really know. I can't really say offhand where the doctrine comes from, if it's Old English common law or whatever. But I think in a marketplace, in a market economy, it seems to be consistent with the idea that the workplace and the employers regulate themselves, run themselves, and it's the government via the labor and employment laws trying to create or regulate a level playing field for employees. So you do have these employment laws to an extent, and unemployment comp and workers' comp, which seem to mitigate or sort of draw back on the concept of firing at will.
Doesn't the employer have to give warning or give notice number 1 or notice number 2 or notice number 3, or is that just something that they do as organizations to kind of cushion themselves or whatever?
Well, it depends. Depending on the layoff. I mean, if you have to give there's a federal law, WARN, and that I can't remember off the top of my head what the acronym itself means, but you may have to give a WARN notice to employees regarding a layoff. I think that's 100 or more employees, and depending on the number being laid off too. But if it's just for like a small employee and not for a layoff for disciplinary reasons or for a layoff of a smaller size, no, you don't necessarily have to give notice. But it's a good idea. Human resource doctrine or human resource practice-wise is a good idea to do that, and then also to possibly insulate yourself from unemployment comp or for allegations of wrongful discharge, discrimination, what have you, to give notice. In some cases, multiple notice.
Now, how does the employment at will concept, how does that interface with union negotiated contracts?
Well, union negotiated contracts really have almost nothing to do with employment at will, because it's the concept that employment at will, there is no contract. Technically, with a union, there is a contract. So you're basically completely mitigating or taking away the concept of employment at will, and you're going to basically contractual-based or contract-based employment with the unionized employees and their representative.
So if you had a facility
that
had both unionized and non-unionized workers, you could have two very different dismissal systems in the same building.
Not only that, if you have a facility where this happens a lot, like with public sector and also some manufacturing facilities with multiple unions. So you could have different contracts governing different employees and different systems regulating how those employees are promoted, terminated, compensated, laid off, everything.
Well, how does the employee, how do you develop any type of protection for yourself? I mean, you're not really guaranteed anything. You're not even guaranteed a letter of recommendation. You're not guaranteed advance notice before you're fired. What can the employee do to try to level the situation for themselves? Because this is not a level playing field.
Well, let's look at it this way, too. There's no guaranteed success either for the employer. In our economy, a market-based economy, technically there is no guarantee of success. Now, we all know realistically that the airlines and some of the car manufacturers, they get government aid, or the defense contractors, they do get government aid. But then again, you could argue so do employees. But no, technically there's no guarantee, and it works the same way to almost the same extent, I would say, or the same extent for employers. But what an employee can basically do is make sure that they're right fit for the job, make sure that they're going to a company that they want to work for if they have that luxury available to them, and if not, then just do the work and try not to sometimes I get angry employees asking me what can we do, and it's like, do the job or look for another job. If not, as long as they're not just treating you poorly on the basis of any protected class, you basically have to bear with it as an employee. It could be the unfortunate reality. Then again, there's also this way to look at it. Bad management isn't necessarily a lot of bad management in the workplace too. So,
very interesting concept, really. But when a person gets employed by an employer, you're really on their and you have rules and how they want to deliver, or you're gone. Am I right? Mm-hmm.
Unless you have what Jeff brought up regarding collective bargaining agreement protecting you, or if you're an individual employee who has your own individual employment agreement. And employment agreements, individual contracts, see becoming more popular in the workplace too, especially with more highly placed executives.
Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of that too, the better employers don't just hire people and then a couple weeks later let them go, or fire them for seemingly no reason or whatever. That creates a bad morale and creates employees that really become bitter against the management. Am I correct?
Yeah, it gives them a bad reputation in the industry. And it costs a lot more money, basically, to fire people. Firing people should always be a last resort. Layoffs should always be a last resort. Of what's called human capital is that employees are the same piece of capital that you have in your business. Why would you destroy capital? What good would that do for you if that's the means of production and making a profit? So treat your employees well in order to get the most out of them is basically the human capital philosophy, or what seems to work best in human resources. And on the back end, it's just going to cost a lot more money anyway to fire them, and then they have to go through hiring and training somebody again.
When you see the upper echelon companies, as far as their top management reputations, what kind of processes are you seeing in personnel to try to remediate people that are not performing quite as well? What types of systems are you seeing that the smarter companies put in place?
Well, they give people either multiple chances or try to move them to positions that they work better in. See if there's, for larger companies, it's easier to shift somebody to another department or a large organization, even if it's not a private sector company. You could shift them to another area, retrain them, or get them more training for their area. Those are generally what you see the most of, or outplacement services. If you do have to fire them, get them, quality outplacement services.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I want to talk a little bit about firing. There are laws that govern that also. Am I correct?
Well, you can't fire on the on the basis of the protected class, but there's no laws in terms of the logistics of firing unless you're getting into layoff under the Warren Act. So.
Okay, could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, basically, if I've fired people before, and I do it, largely the same way we're sitting here talking. I mean, you explain to somebody why they're being fired, and if there's documentation, what the documentation itself indicates. There are laws regarding the viewing of their personnel file and attaching rebuttals to documentation that they disagree with. There's laws regarding that, but there is no law regarding the actual logistics of it. But there, so that part, no, there's no law. I mean, there is a law regarding continuation of benefits. They have benefits. There could be contractual obligations relative to severance, things like that.
I've read that in some states, among employees fired, there could be a significant percentage that are declared ineligible for unemployment insurance. What helps to determine whether, when you're dismissed, you're eligible for unemployment?
Generally, if it's a layoff, you're eligible because the employee, him or herself, didn't create the cause of their unemployment. Generally, that's what you look at relative to unemployment comp, how the unemployment situation itself was created. This is basically an insurance fund, a pool of money designed to help people in transition from one job to another during any time off or during periods of underemployment where they're not getting enough hours. So basically, if it's due to performance and some forms of misconduct where maybe it was a lighter or not a completely proven sort of misconduct, there's a greater chance, a likelihood of getting unemployment comp. So let's say a person was fired due to theft, but yet there's no proof of any of that. The employer never documented it. That would be the proof. There's no documentation, anything like that, for the employer to cover themselves with respect to the theft. Then it's possible to get unemployment comp in that situation. If it was performance, and they basically just fired him without any warning or anything like that, in that situation, it's possible that you would get, as an employee, you would get unemployment comp. And that is, like as I said earlier, one of the mitigating factors of the doctrine of employment at will. And
the employer does pay into employment comp, right, for his organization, am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's right.
And that's kind of an insurance policy, am I correct?
Yeah, it's generally it's regulated by the states, It's a statewide insurance fund
Very
that
good.
all employers
Okay,
pay
we're
into.
going down to a break now at this time. So thank you all for watching, and keep watching us in our next segment. And once again, check out our website, www.employmenthour.com. You'll find all kinds of information if you're looking for a job, if you have a job and you want to improve your job, etc. Thank you for watching. We'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to the Employment Hour. We're here with Charles KRUGEL. He's an attorney in the area of employment law. And I'm here with our co-host, Mr. Jeff Williams. Charles, welcome again.
Thanks.
And you had some questions of Charles in relation to handbooks?
Yes. Tell us why an employer might be interested in having a formal employee handbook.
Well, on the preventive side of human resources, or proactive side, it helps create basically a workplace that has defined expectations of what's expected of an employee, and it also tells the employee about the company itself, what the culture is, and what they can expect from their employer. So there's a mutual benefit to having a handbook, to putting in writing some sort of expectation on both sides, mutual expectations. So and then in that context, it also helps to alleviate workplace conflict and disputes.
Now, what is a good process for collecting the information you want in there? Let's say you're a small company with just a couple top management people. You obviously don't want to be too isolated as far as who's involved in writing it. How do you go about pulling the information from a variety of people in the company to make sure you're really getting a good breadth in what you're including in there?
That's what I call strategic human resources. You're defining what human resources itself, or what human capital is to the company. And what do you want the company to be, and what do you want the company to be to employees? I mean, obviously the bottom line is you're making money, you're making a profit. Well, how are you going to do that? By maximizing the value of employees. And then you look at the jobs themselves, what the company's doing. If it's an auto, like an auto manufacturer, you're going to want to have streamlined employment or lean employment manufacturing processes. And you're going to want well-trained people. You're going to want people spaced out or in positions so that there's safety is instilled, and that safety becomes a focus, so people aren't missing work. They're not off leave because of injury or poor workplace safety practices, things like that. It's largely an analytical process. For some companies that are more entrepreneurial in their philosophy, that could be difficult. But then again, not everything has to be in writing either. So I mean, a larger company, you may want more in writing. A smaller company or a company that's more entrepreneurial may be better to put less in writing and just communicate certain expectations, culture, things like that.
Orally.
Orally, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
This work is a backup for the employer in terms of when an employee really has done something against the rules or whatever, that then he can refer to the handbook and say, well, this was written on our handbook and this and that and whatever?
It could, yeah. It could also work against the employer if the handbook itself is it creates a contract. It's so narrow in focus or in nature that it basically creates a contract that, again, diminishes the impact of employment and will. And in some cases, you could even write, employment and will, but yet the provisions of the contract, actions speak louder than words. And if you treat them as if they're a contractual employee, that may still diminish or even negate the idea of employment and will.
Is it good for them to have an attorney look at the handbook as they're setting it up and making sure that they don't create a contract out of it that they don't want?
To not only so they're not creating a contract, but also to make sure that they're not discriminating against any protected classes, that they're not discriminating potentially on the basis of union or concerted any sort of protected activity or protected communications in the workplace. I mean, obviously, the First Amendment doesn't necessarily apply in a workplace because employees don't have freedom of speech.
That's true. And I think that's an important point for people that are being employed, that they really don't have that. When you're at the the site of employment, you kind of have to go along with the corporate line. You have to kind of represent the corporation, and you can't really just say whatever you want.
Not only verbally, but also electronically and in writing too. It applies across any form of communication, body language also.
Yes, and emails really are not private in a corporation. Yes,
emails aren't private. Instant messaging isn't private. Voicemail isn't necessarily private. It extends even in cases to the parking lot or company-owned equipment.
I think that's very, very important for people these days. How does the handbook fit in with documentation on a job? What's the whole issue of documentation?
Well, the handbook could create the basis itself for what you document, what would be documented, and how it's going to be documented. And it helps create the basis for that along with the culture. And a more bureaucratic culture will have a more detailed handbook and then also more detailed documentation. So if you're going to have, and documentation itself could be paramount in terms of insulating, for a company to insulate itself from liability should an employment or labor action be brought against them.
Now, when you say documentation, can you kind of define that for our average listener?
Yeah, it could be you're documenting generally performance and conduct or behavior in a workplace. Those are the two basic things that are being documented, performance and conduct. You're documenting their employment history, their wage, salary history, their benefits, promotions, demotions, disciplinary actions, pretty much everything that happens in the workplace.
I see. Can you tell us a little bit about the seminars that you've given? I know you've given a lot of different types of seminars. What kind do you give and to what audiences?
The seminars are largely, in a sense, almost what we're doing right now, sort of Q&A, and they're to business people, business owners who are basically looking to learn more about human resource, preventive and proactive human resources, and also the legal side of it, what it means to actually face a government agency, a regulatory agency like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or National Labor Relations Board, or what it means to go to court, to have to litigate an employment matter, how to negotiate employment contracts or collective bargaining agreements, things like that. So it largely deals with the gamut of labor and employment related issues.
What's the most common seminar question you're receiving from employers?
We've covered a lot of that here actually. Employment at will, how do you discharge somebody, documentation, issues like that. How much do you document? It always comes up, quality over quantity in terms of documentation, and it's impossible to really document everything. Something's always left out for the most part, even in contracts. I mean, as far as I know, there's no such thing as a absolute impenetrable contract.
Yeah, I was taking pictures of weddings one time. I had a family that owned a construction business, and the man had, he says he never had contracts. And I said, well, what are you talking about? You have to have a contract. He says, no, if you can't look at the guy in the eye across the table, if you can't shake his hand and know you've got somebody who's really going to be an ally to you, he said any contract in the world would not hold it and whatever. However, it's good to have contracts. Am I right?
To an extent, but I agree with this. I agree with this relative. Is that?
No, it was an acquaintance at a wedding that I was photographing.
Yeah, I'm a sole practitioner, so I go with that too. I have handshake agreements with some of my clients. As long as they pay on time, everything is cool. That's it. I have a longer agreement that sets out things, but to some people they find it intimidating, and sometimes they just do an agreement by email, saying email back saying yes, you agree that this is what you'll pay me, and works fine like that too. You want to, I agree. You want to be able to look people in the eye and do it and via handshake, basically be able to work. It's a lot more efficient that way, and you get to concentrate on actual operations as opposed to the personalities involved and all these other issues that tend to play into the business.
Now we have a bit more time. What do you think the market is for people that are starting their own business at this time and this day and age? You think that this is a good climate for that, or you think they should hold off?
It's always a good climate to start a business if you're a good business person. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to sell, you know how to market yourself, it's always a good climate. It's tough, I think, in terms of the gap right now for people going to work, the gap between the higher salary, higher wage people and the lower middle, the middle shrinking, it seems. So in that market, it may be tough. We're still in the process of transforming over to a more service-based economy, more retail-based service, or what they call McJobs, whatever. Not to slander or not to put down McDonald's, but that's become the vernacular. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, it's tough. But always for entrepreneurial people who are good at selling and marketing themselves, it's always a good climate.
Okay, we just have a little bit of time left. Can you tell us when should he know that he should be hiring somebody such as yourself, an employment lawyer? Well,
anytime you want to start documenting what's going on in the workplace, you want handbooks or policies, is a good time. Anytime you start getting wind of the union knocking on the door or employees trying to organize themselves into a collective, that would be a good time. Or anytime you start getting complaints of harassment, discrimination, those types of matters. And then, of course, the obvious is complaints from regulatory agencies or lawsuits.
And probably earlier than later, you really should get into thinking about the law and what the laws are and having some consultation on that. Am I correct?
I think proactive and preventive human resources is always cheaper than reactive, meaning legal representation on the lawsuit or complaint side or on the union avoidance or negotiation side. It's always
we're
cheaper.
out of time in this segment, and Charles KRUGEL, thank you so much for being with us. It's been very, very informative. And for you, our listeners, check out our website, www.employmenthour.com. We have some things on there from Charles KRUGEL, and you could contact him through our website. We'll be back in a moment. And welcome back to the Employment Hour. I'm your host, Paul KUTYLO, and this is Jeff Williams on my one side here. Jeff, good to see you again.
Hi, Paul.
And MOHAMMED FAHEEM is here, and we're just going to have kind of
Paul.
around the desk discussion about various issues and whatever of employment of interest to employers and employees. Now, Jeff, we wanted to focus on you a little bit about the 50s generation. And what are their challenges now to getting reemployed or getting a different job and that kind of thing?
Now, before we get into the 50s generation, let me just point out that Jeff just hit 50.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
No.
that gear just turned. So
That's only because there's some question about the birth certificate.
But that brings up an issue, too, that I feel very strongly about, and that is, how old are you? How old are you? I've met people in their 20s that were so set in their ways and so dead in a way that they may as well have been 95. Okay, and I've met people that were 95 that were still willing to give it a go, that still had fire in the oven and really still had enthusiasm.
Well, on that topic, Paul, I mean, I was just a couple of days back. I was listening to a very interesting conversation on the radio that today's 60s are actually, people are healthy enough to be where they were like when they were in their 40s. So some of the insurance companies are actually changing their actuarial tables to reflect the changes. People are more healthy, they are living longer lives. So yeah, I mean the paradigm is changing. So by that, by that measure, Jeff is 35.
That's right.
Well, let's get into
That's absolutely true. I see you as a very young man in that kind of thing. But
let's get into the 50s situation there.
Well, one of the contrasts I think you're seeing today happened in my own family. My father worked for the federal government for most of his career, and when he was 58, he had a chance, by combining his military time with government time, he had a chance to retire at a relatively nice pension level. And I remember all of his children were together, as four of us. We were all together with my dad about the same time, and he said, after I leave this job next month, I'm not going to work at anything I don't want to for the rest of my life. And I will have to tell you that he did a really good job until he was 85 and passed away at 85. He really didn't. This was the mentality of that, the greatest generation ever, that, as Tom Brokaw talks about. Boomers have a very different perspective here. The key, I think, to people over 50, the current generation, is they want to be players. They want to continue to be players unless there's some health impediment to prevent them from doing that. And what we're seeing right now is there's really kind of three categories that 50-plussers, 50 to 62-year-olds, are kind of falling into as far as life mission. There's about, I don't know what the approximate percentages are here, but let's say the majority of this group are people who have some reasonably good financial security for retirement. Typically, these are people who have a defined benefit pension, and they have some money put aside in a 401k. That, unfortunately, has now declined to the point where fewer than 40% of corporate employees are eligible for defined benefit pensions, and even where they are.
Explain the defined benefits.
The defined benefit pension is the pension of old where you are paid a certain amount of money per month as long as you live. It's guaranteed. My wife retired from Cook County about 5 years ago. She has a defined benefit. It's based on a percentage of the last 5 years of your employment. They use not all 5, it's the high 3 of your last 5. And in most employers, about the max you can get is 80%. Now, there are some exceptions to this. So my wife has a defined benefit pension that says you will get this number of thousands of dollars a month as long as you live. And as a matter of fact, because we paid extra over the years, even if my wife were to pass away, I get some of it still, a small percentage of it. So that's defined benefit.
Jeff, what would be your advice to somebody who is headed towards the retirement age, or who's been offered an early retirement package, what would be your advice to somebody like that? Start their own business, look for another job? I mean, what do you think is going to be the most productive use of their
Well, let's
time?
not talk about productive so much, because that's really kind of a corporate concept more than a life concept.
Okay.
Let's talk about getting centered on your passion again.
Okay.
The reality is that many of us had to live to work for 25 or 30 years. We had family responsibilities, we had obligations, and that doesn't say that we didn't enjoy parts of our job. I had 9 different jobs in my corporate career, and I can tell you that I really only dug about 3 of them. The other 6 were okay, I learned something new, I got paid well, whatever. That's true of a lot of people. They get to be 55, 58 years old, and they say, you know, I haven't done a thing that's work-related in 15 years I really enjoy doing. So I think the first thing you need to do when you have the opportunity to either take traditional retirement in a defined benefit plan or some other type of early retirement scheme is you've got to sit down, perhaps with the help of a coach.
Okay. Do you coach people in that respect? I mean, if they need help, can people come to you and find you? I know that you have a website, so
I'm more specialized than that.
okay.
As I said, there's really kind of 3 categories of 50-plus people. There's the kind that can pretty much retire after, say, 57 or 58 in an orderly fashion, and they don't really have to work again if they don't want to.
Okay.
The second category are people who can retire, say, before 62, but they're still going to have to bring in some income for a while.
Okay.
Then you got the third category that are so bad off financially that they may have to work till they're 70. Those are really the way it breaks down into those 3 groups. And I can't tell you exactly what percentages.
Mm-hmm.
But of the first 2 groups particularly, the ones where they're well off and can retire, and the ones that are reasonably well off, those are where we get most of our people for self-employment.
Okay.
We're kind of a subset of that whole retirement planning movement.
Okay. Now, when you say that they come to you, are they coming to plan out a business? Is that what you're helping them with defining their path and helping them with the steps into attaining that goal that they are setting up? Or do you help with defining the goal also?
Well, it varies. I get people ranging all the way from they've just started getting some kind of warm feelings about being an entrepreneur, all the way to people who are halfway through their business plan.
Okay.
But they don't know how to implement it. I mean, I get a whole spectrum, which is why this job is so much fun. I would say that from my experience in doing this for 18 years, virtually everybody who comes to me has some inkling in their subconscious somewhere that they want to do something independent.
Now, how important is it to put that feeling down on paper and quantify that and, put goals and goalposts? In other words, how important is it to have a business plan in order to succeed?
I think it's very important. But what I recommend my clients do first is what I call a life plan.
Okay.
Which is, where do you want to be in the next 3 years as far as health, as far as family relationships, financially, religious. I'll just give you a quick example of how this worked in my life. When I decided to leave the corporate world 19 years ago to become self-employed, I did like a little life plan for myself. And one of the things that was really important to me at that point in my life is I was in the process of seriously converting a conversion from being a Presbyterian to being a Catholic. I had married a Catholic woman, and fortunately we had a very contemporary priest who didn't insist that we both be Catholic, but I had every expectation of doing it. Well, here I was, my first year in business, extremely busy, particularly at night. And in order to formally transfer into the Catholic faith, you have to go through a program called RCIA. And it's a number of weeks at night. Well, my life plan had been set out in such a way that I not only had financial goals, but I had a goal that, within this 6-month period, I want to be prepared to formally be welcomed into the Catholic faith. And that's why I talk about a life plan. Too many people come to me and they want to get into the marketing strategy immediately. They want to get into the fundraising. To me, that's premature.
Okay.
Let's look at the life plan first. Because what we're trying to do is convert you from a life experience where you're living to work to where you're working to live. Work is part of your life. Now, it doesn't mean you don't work hard. I work about 50 hours a week. but I kind of do it my own schedule. I still take about a month's worth of vacation a year.
You have to enjoy what you're doing, otherwise you're not going to be successful at it no matter what. I mean, you're going to have health problems. You may make a lot of money, but you'll end up with high blood pressure.
That's
and
right.
all,
Right.
You know, all of those things.
Very important, and that would put people into another category of old age, the people that are basically convalescing from medical situations, and they're kind of always kind of sick. And you know, you're talking more about more active type of seniors that still have something to give and still want to do something with themselves and with their lives. And
So,
the word of passion too that you mentioned earlier. It's important to get in touch with things that you're passionate about, that you can build a business on.
Right. I mean, people love enthusiasm. People will buy from people who are enthusiastic, even if you're not quite as knowledgeable as another salesperson. If you're more enthusiastic, now obviously you don't want to be scamming people with no knowledge at all, but enthusiasm is a key. And a lot of people, by the time they get in their mid-50s, they're burnt out from the corporate world. They're not enthusiastic at all
Right.
about anything work-related. And this is why it is doubly difficult if you are downsized in your 50s. You're already not enthusiastic. And now you're in a stressful interviewing situation where you have to come across as, I will be your most enthusiastic, loyal employee if you hire me. But you're already almost biologically predisposed not to feel that way.
Right.
It's a real tough challenge.
And I think we can talk a little bit about these aspects in the next segments about, you know, getting a job, finding a job, writing resumes, interviewing, and how do you sell yourself to an employer, especially when you are coming up to that middle age.
And it's like you're saying, it's very, very important to avoid kind of hardened attitudes or chips on your shoulder, and feel sort of like the victim of society, or the victim of being a layoff or that kind of thing, to really market yourself correctly to your new employer.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it never pays to come across as a victim. That's true in personal life, and it's true in the business world too. There are some biases out there. I mean, I've been seeing these represented when I see surveys of HR directors. The average age of an HR director is probably late 40s today, which, you know, that's fairly close to the 50s, but still there's some age difference. And one of the things that we're hearing from HR directors is they're reluctant to take a chance on a 50-plus person because they don't think that they will learn the new technology fast enough. I was just talking to a client the other day who went through a number of job interviews before he decided to go full-time on the entrepreneurial path. And they said to this client, they said, well, we don't think you're keeping up with the latest technology because you didn't work with it in your last couple of jobs.
Right.
And he said, but I do. I subscribe to 2 specialty newsletters. I am in a networking group that talks about this technology all the time. It was really difficult for him to get this across to the HR director at age 57 that he was still tuned in. Because, you know, they could take a 30-year-old today and say, listen, I want you to learn everything about podcasting in the next 24 hours. And they'll learn it. I mean, that's what they consider to be responsiveness today.
Right.
So what's tough is you have to go into a job interview when you're in your 50s. You have to be quietly confident. You have to play to your strengths. And the strength is you've learned a heck of a lot in 25 or 30 years.
And
you got to let it play out.
And you've got those skills that are transferable that you can bring to any job situation. I mean, transferable skills are more and more important to an employer also. There's a feeling out there that, okay, I'm over 50, I'm too old, I can't find a job. I mean, I had a couple of people come into my office the other day, and they were just so down and out, and I gave them your example. I said, you know, look at Paul. I mean, he goes and finds a good job, and he could do it because the attitude was there. And you have the skills that you can translate to any job situation. Most important, transferable skills. And then older people are more reliable compared to, you know, kids out of college who might want to leave early, take weekends off. And I'm seeing this trend also, Jeff, that employers are realizing this now, that an older person who is willing to learn new things, not somebody who's set in their ways, that, you know, if I can do only AR 400 as an accountant, I don't want to learn Peachtree, for example.
Right.
So if you're willing to put that out, that I'm willing to learn, and you can prove that yeah, you can still land
Well,
yourself a job.
a couple of things from my thing, and we're heading down to a break here. From my situation, one of them that helped me was something that one of your employment advisors said: keep away from a hardened attitude and don't have that chip on your shoulder. So when I went out looking for a job, that helped me tremendously because it put me in the category of the people, the few that didn't. Another thing was I found an employer that looked at me and said, you know, I've looked at 3 or 4 different other people that were younger, right out of school, and I've had it. I'm not going to retrain people. You come here with a lot of experience, and I want that experience. So I got lucky in that way, but I think those kinds of opportunities, like you're saying, employers are looking up to that, and they are beginning to see that they need that kind of thing. We have to go to a break now. There's a lot more information on our website, www.employmenthour.com. I keep mentioning that because it really is that good. There's all kinds of information. You can check out this and other topics of interest to employers and employees there. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Employment Hour. Paul KUTYLO here along with Jeff Williams and Mohammed FAHEEM. Mohammed, what is your job title where you're working at this time?
Well, I'm the manager for the Business and Employer Services at WorkNet of Northern Cook County. Used to be the IETC before, the Illinois Employment and Training Center.
Okay.
And we were also called as the one-stop centers. So basically, we are there at the employment office, helping employers find productive employees and helping people find productive jobs also.
Very good. I know that you have your fingers on the employment in the state of Illinois. You get a lot of reports, a lot of things. What are hot areas where people are getting jobs these days?
It's not so much the hot areas, Paul. I mean, depending on who you talk to, those areas can be different. There is a lot of emphasis, believe it or not, coming back on manufacturing now. I mean, you may hear that we are turning into a service economy. Guess what? There's lots of companies which are opening up manufacturing facilities over here also.
So how did that happen? I thought everything was being outsourced to
what is
other
happening
countries.
is, see, on the outsourcing aspect of it also, that's a very interesting point you brought up. The market field is getting leveled in other countries also. So, for example, I mean, take computer programming. A lot of jobs are outsourced to India, right? Now, the level of pay that was there was much lower than the level of pay over here. But over a period of the last few years now, that level of pay is increasing in order to keep pace with the rest of the world. Otherwise, those people are leaving and coming over here. So, a lot of manufacturing is coming back also. And, you know, transportation, for example, say if you make a car in Japan, and then you transport the thing over here, the economy that you're affecting by manufacturing overseas is getting washed out by the transportation and all those other factors. A lot of companies that you're saying that Japanese manufacturers are starting up plants over here. They are assembling things over here. So things are slowly changing.
And what other areas? You're talking manufacturing is prospering over here again. What else?
Manufacturing is starting to prosper. I mean, it's not the hottest thing going on right now. We are still in the service economy aspect of it. Manufacturing is coming back. Services are still very strong. Now, again, depending on the area that you are in, different services. I mean, all the way like from in our region, for example, there is a critical skill shortage initiative that the governor announced and that we are implementing. There was a shortage of skilled workers for the transportation and logistics industry. So we put together some courses, and we have got graduates coming out of those courses and finding jobs in the logistics and transportation industry. So it depends on where you are. Depends on where you are, basically. But the overall picture, there's a lot of pessimism. For example, amongst people that there are no jobs out there. You would be really surprised because I work with employers. They come to me all the time and say there are no good employees out there.
Look at that.
Find us the right person. Now that is something which people don't know. The unemployment rate, for example, for the Arlington Heights area is way below the state average. Way below. State average is like 4.7% as of yesterday or something. We are at 3 point something, 3.6 or 3.7. So it is tough for employers to find good employees also. So if you've lost your job, don't be disheartened. As long as you can brush up on your skills, that is something that we were discussing a couple of minutes back, Jeff. As long as you can brush up on your skills and bring the skills that are needed for today's jobs. Like if you were a guy who specialized in making horseshoes, for example, and then the horse carriage went out. So if you took the same, blacksmithing skills that you had and transformed them into, designing something else, packaging material, for example, you would still find a job. So even now, if you can transfer your skills and learn some of the new skills, you'll always have a job. Mm-hmm. So that is something very, very interesting, which I see a lot of people come in there, they're so despondent, I've lost my job. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to head. That's where your career planning comes in. Sit down with the career counselor, come into our office, come in and talk to us. We got free resources all the time to help people out. Mm-hmm. Not just if you're filing for unemployment, but you can just come in and talk to a counselor about what is happening, how do I plan my life, and what kind of resources that the state has, that the government has to retrain people. We've got training funds that we administer through the Workforce Investment Act, for example, that we can actually set up a training grant for you. You don't have to pay it back. There are certain restrictions on qualifications on all that, how you qualify, but once you come in, you can find out more details about it.
I think in line with what you're saying, one of my idols is Paul McCartney. Here's a guy that, he's still singing songs, he's still, recording songs, he's still making up songs, but he seems to find a new place for his songs, a new thing. You think he's dead, and all of a sudden he ends up doing the thing in New York for the 9/11
right.
Memorial, and creating a song for that.
Bounces back.
He just keeps coming back, and yet he's doing the same kind of thing. He's just finding a new arena, a new place to be hired for it, and whatever.
Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring out in today's segment was, how do you find a job? I see a lot of people focusing on writing a great resume, practicing interviewing techniques, learning all about these things. It is like teaching somebody to fish. Okay, so they got a great fishing rod and reel, they got a great bait and everything. They need to know where the fish are. How do you find them? That is something which I'm very interested in talking to people, and we are actually planning a new seminar at our office, which would be a monthly seminar every second Wednesday of the month. And come and talk to us. How do you find a job in today's economy? How do you find a job with today's technology? Most people don't know that you can actually go to Google, for example. We are not talking of the commercial resume-based databases, without taking any names. The latest research that came out, this is the report by Booz Allen Hamilton from February of 2006. Where are people finding jobs, or where are the employers finding employees? 21% of employees are getting hired through employer websites. 19% through referrals or word of mouth. So between these two, it's almost like 50% of the new hires last year were through these two resources. We are talking till the end of 2005. The report came out in February of 2006. Now that we are 8 months into 2006, those percentages are going up. The commercial resume databases, 4% to 5%. Newspapers, 4 to 5%. Job fairs, 3%. So people need to refocus their efforts in finding out where the jobs are. The best way that you can do that is go to Google. Now you're going to ask me, how do you find a job on Google? Okay.
How do you find a job on Google?
Yes, how do you find a job on Google?
Now Google needs to pay me for this,
Okay.
but go to Google, say, take any industry, okay? Say you are in the pharmaceutical industry, okay? Go to the search box in Google and put in pharmaceutical industry plus your zip code. Just that. Hit enter. And when you hit enter, it comes back and gives you a whole list of sites. The first site that it would give you would be pharmaceutical industry plus your zip code. Click on that. It'll literally open up and list every pharmaceutical industry in a whole radius around where you're living.
It's amazing. It's a tool like that, just so quickly you get the answers.
You can get hundreds. For example, the freight forwarding industry. If I go to the freight, if I go to Google and I put in freight forwarding plus 60005, the zip code for my office, it'll give me over 300 hits right then for freight forwarding companies around the zip code 60005.
Right.
And then you can click on it on every company. There's a map which is on the side, so you'll know exactly how far it is. You can get directions from your home, and then you focus on the companies that you want to work with. Now, once you know which company you want to work with and which company is within the commuting distance that you want to commute to, go to their website. Most companies now have got online recruiting going on-site recruiting from their websites. That's where the 21% figure comes from. Find out the jobs that they have listed. Now, once you found out the jobs that they have listed, they tell you how to apply for that job. And there's a whole segment that we can just put on that one topic as how do you apply for that job.
Very interesting. When I did this recently, I consulted the website of the major hospital that I ended up being employed by, but I actually applied for the wrong job. And I put in all my qualifications or whatever, and the guy sitting on the other side thought, gee, this guy would be better doing this particular job rather than the one that he's applying for. So I went in and he actually talked me into this other job, which fit perfectly and was wonderful. But I think what people ultimately are looking for is the marriage between your own passions, your own things that give you drive, that really give you excitement in life, mixed with and coupled with a job site where they really will allow you to expand on those passions, to put that into practice in a job that creates a product or creates something that people pay money for.
It is very important for any kind of job or any kind of life situation in general, Jeff. I mean, if you are not excited about that situation, you're not going to be successful. And it will show whether it's your life situation, whether it's your job situation. So find out about the company as much as possible before you decide to go and spend your life there or part of your life there. Is that something that you would really want to get involved in? Read about the company. Read, go to the library, read up the reports on the company, go through some business journals, find out as much as you can about the company. Is that something that you would be comfortable in? Or would you rather work in a smaller company where there's more interaction? Would you want to be a big fish in a small pond, or would you like to be a small fish in a big pond?
Okay, I hate to stop at this point, but we do. We're getting down to being out of time. This has been very exciting things. If you haven't learned anything in this segment, believe me, you haven't been listening at all. But I'm sure that you have, and thank you very much for watching. We're happy you're here. Thank you very much.